Hi, this is Dale Johnson for Lincoln Fire and Rescue. What a long, strange trip it has been. I'm referring, of course, to 2020. And of course, COVID comes to mind when we think of 2020. A second unique circumstance that has happened more locally here in Lincoln is the return of a retired fire chief to become interim fire chief. So it's my pleasure to welcome on LNK TV, LFR, Fire Chief Michael Despain. All right, I'm confused, Chief. Is it interim fire chief, fire chief? What would you like your label to be?
I think it depends on the day. If it's really, really bad, I don't want any title. But right now, it's officially interim fire chief because I am just a contractor coming back to help out temporarily.
Right, and I want you to explain that. But to reference back, it was March 6th that you announced you were going to explore some other life opportunities, including travel. Well,
yeah,
COVID kind of changed that for you, but you did make it out to a return to California, to the West Coast. And then you were asked by Mayor Gaylor Baird to come back and help us out because the result of the pandemic was to suspend the search for your replacement. Of course, Assistant Chief Pat Borer was the leader of LFR for a period of time. And we want to thank him for his service and his continued service with Lincoln Fire and Rescue. But you agreed to come back. Take us back to that point where you had your conversation with the mayor.
Well, just like everybody else, the world was heading down one path and then it took a hard left-right turn. And so everybody had to go to plan B and C and D. And so, I was able to spend a little time out in California. I was actually the interim chief for another fire agency, just temporarily. Same thing. They were looking for a process to hire a permanent chief, and I told them I would help them for a little while. That same offer was made to the mayor when I left to say, go through your process, try and find a good fire chief for the city of Lincoln, but don't settle. If you feel like you just can't find the right candidate and time will solve it, then let me know and I'll come back for a little while to hold the fort. And the idea was there was going to be a little bit of world travel in there. Of course, that's not happening for a while. The other issue was, I wasn't ready to sit in a rocking chair necessarily, but it was to, explore a little bit of the fire service, but not work full time. It's a little hard on the body, so to speak. And I think the key issue for me was, yes, it would be nice to relax a little bit more, but if I was sitting around relaxing, well, I knew that Lincoln Fire and Rescue, my colleagues were in crisis, I would feel pretty bad. So the intent for the mayor and for myself was to just come back and help for a little while, because you have to think about it as we had a certain number of chief officers that barely kept up with day-to-day work. Now I step out and then you have COVID and civil unrest and maybe some economic issues and crisis that are going on. So it was triple the work with at least one, if not more, chief officers kind of out of the mix. And so that's a lot to ask, and that wears on them. So fortunately was able to come back and hold the fort for a little while they go back through their process.
March doesn't seem like that long ago unless you really document what has changed. And that Grateful Dead reference that I started our conversation with certainly applies. We hadn't used the word doorway triage. PPE was an unknown term. So let's talk about how those two now all too familiar phrases have really dominated the practice of Lincoln Fire and Rescue.
Well, it seems like every decade or so we have some crisis. 9/11, the 2008 crisis, and every time that happens, the fire service has to pivot quickly and address the new hazards. And I remember after 9/11, we had white powder calls all over the place, and we had to quickly adjust. And what was normal is no longer normal, and now the new normal is the new normal. So we get used to it. So in this case, we had to change some tactics. And so typically we try and get there quickly and get patient care started as quickly as possible. And we time that, but now we have to adjust the risk of patient care versus risking the first responders' capabilities. And so doorway triage is one way they do it, where they'll go to the door and they'll just kind of assess the patient from a distance and verbally, and they'll try and ask questions and then ascertain how safe is it. And then they limit how many people are in with the patient. Now, patient's having a heart attack and their pulse is non-breathing, then the patient's life is going to kind of dictate the risk that the firefighters take. But that's a new level of operation that we're going to have in place, I think, for quite a while.
And it starts with dispatch. We have given props to dispatch and the chain that leads a firefighter or a paramedic to the front door of a person that's called. Dispatch starts with asking some questions. Anyone in the household? How about you as a caller? Do you have any of the COVID symptoms? And by the time the firefighter or the paramedic gets to the front door, they know or have a very good idea about what they are about to go into in that residence.
Yeah, that little bit of information on the front end makes a lot of difference in how we respond and then the risk that we accept. And just think of it as the wrong call could take a whole crew out of service for a period of time, because if they're exposed, then we have to make sure we don't allow that exposure to extend through the agency. Otherwise, we will have no workforce to come to work and no resources to send. So we're very sensitive to that.
Well, it doesn't slow to any great degree the process of responding to a call. It has cramped LFR's style just a bit in terms of its community relationship. And by that, I mean the fact that the fire stations have had to close and firefighters have, and paramedics too, for that matter, have had to pull back on their community relationship and their involvement with the community. Talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, well, we don't want to risk contaminating other people and vice versa. So we've had to shut some of that down and modify it. So just like now we're doing a few things more remotely, and we're doing a little bit more via social media and video, not as much in-person stuff, which we like and people respond to that the most. But until we get through this, we have to be kind of frugal with how much exposure we take for a non-emergency event. And so, but we have some pretty creative people, and they're trying to come up with new ways to reach the audience and capture their attention. And again, the information we're trying to give has some type of outcome where we're trying to prevent, even though it looks like it's not the front line event, we still want to prevent fires and we still want to prevent falls and accidents and hazardous material spills and cardiac events. So that's the message we still have to, we can't stop our message, our mission. We just have to adjust it a little bit.
And that's where the Fire Escape platform on Lincoln Fire and Rescue's website bridges the gap that has been created by COVID-19. People can go on the LFR website, customers, I should say, is how we refer to them, customers, can go onto the LNK web, learn everything from how to escape from your home, practicing those techniques. Also, Nancy Christ has done a great job too, PIO for LFR, and that is to take you into some stations virtually and give you some flavor of what goes on in a fire station without actually being able to go there.
Yeah, well, we have to reach out to our customer base, our clients, to make sure they understand what it's like in the fire station. There's a lot of misinformation, so it helps to kind of give them that perspective, but we also don't want to quit our mission of reaching out and making sure we're connecting with the community that we serve. So I really appreciate Nancy, and her role as PIO continues, even though she's kind of stepped back into the field, but she's got a group of people that are very creative and they come up with great ideas like that.
By the way, the Fire Escape, you can find more on Doorway Triage. A video is there. Also, you can learn more about other inside happenings through Lincoln Fire and Rescue. That's the Fire Escape on Lincoln Fire and Rescue. Go back to you, if I could, Chief, as the interim chief of Lincoln Fire and Rescue. From the time you retired in early March until now, how do you have to adapt as a leader of a city department when there is other than what we've already talked about, doorway triage, PPEs, the safety, the fire stations closing to the public, those sorts of things. But as the leader of a department, can you take us a little bit into your management of the fire department under a pandemic?
Well, a lot of things change, and so we're adjusting all the time, and so maybe it's work processes and more administrative. But a good example is kind of balancing that, and this is new for me. So I honestly I'm trying to make it up as I go. But I have a group of people that can now work remotely, and we have to figure out how that virtual environment works, make sure we're connecting, and make sure we understand their needs and their work product, and make sure we're being productive and those kind of things. But I also have a segment of the fire department that can't work virtually. The fire department cannot work virtually. They have to go expose themselves every day and put themselves at risk. And so as the chief, I have to kind of balance that. So I'm in the office probably 70% of the time, just so they're taking the risk, and there's a little bit of risk I think that myself and a couple of the chief officers have decided to do, just because we need to kind of resonate with them and understand their risk. But it is kind of a new environment, but some of the fundamentals are still there, and we need to remember what our mission is, and that's to provide service to the community, save lives and property, provide a good outcome. We just have to learn how to do it a little bit different as time goes by.
Chief, how long do you see yourself in this interim position? You obviously have had some conversations with the mayor about this. This isn't going to be a long-term commitment for you. That's not what you want. That's not what the mayor and the city wants nor needs. But it's all up to you, what you want to do. How long do you see this happening? Again, I'm almost answering my own question. It depends on the pandemic, I would assume.
Well, we have to, so this is kind of the thesis that we're working through. And one is we have to kind of figure out how to work through these things. We can't just stop everything because of pandemic. We have to figure out how to work through it. And so the time I had with the other agency in California, we worked through a couple of those. We had to redesign what we traditionally did to make it a little bit different. It was a little faster, was probably a little more efficient in terms of getting the recruit candidate with enough exposure to the community that they had a feel for that was the right candidate, because the mayor's job is to find the right candidate for her, but she also needs to make sure it's the right candidate for the community at large, firefighters, the stakeholder group, that kind of stuff. So to answer your question is, my agreement with the mayor is to stay as long as needed to get through the crisis, but that the priority will be to continue through that recruitment, and we work through some options of what that might look like. So she's taking that under advisement. But I think that they're still going to be able to continue through with a recruitment and have just a little bit different formula than we've done before. But the agreement we had and we kind of joke about it a little bit, was try and recruit while the grass is green. So that in Nebraska, there's a timeline to that, right?
What has the pandemic done to recruiting and training?
Well, we had to shut a lot of that stuff down just to reduce the risk. And remember, we pulled 3 or 4 of our members into almost full-time, the incident command system drove those people into that unified command function so that they're working with the other city agencies, in particular, city county health department, to provide that service. So we lost some of that. That's starting to pick back up just because we have to learn to work through the pandemic. So some of those people are coming back in. We're modifying some things, but where there's a little bit of reopening, if you will, in terms of training and in our community outreach activities.
Chief, in closing, I have to admit I'm a little conflicted. Part of me wants to continue to talk to you for a period of time, because we have for 4+ years, and I've enjoyed our conversation. Yeah. Secondly, is I'd like to cut you loose and let you go retire, because like after 3.5 decades, you deserve it. So just realize my confliction here when I say it's good to have you back, and it'll be good to see you go.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it, and I'm glad that I could be of service. I'm just hoping that it's a fairly short time, but our job right now is to kind of take a little bit of the load off the mayor and off the command staff that we have, so everybody can get some work done, work through the new normal and the COVID crisis, and figure out how we're going to do business over time. And so it's not just work. There's a little bit of a pleasure for me too, because I get to come back and work with some very great colleagues that are just going to be lifelong friends, including yourself.
Thank you. We welcome back Interim Fire Chief Michael Despain to LNK TV. Thanks everybody for being with us on Lincoln Fire and Rescue.